Hey guys, welcome to EOC Explain. Alright, today we're going to go over question 50. If you guys want to read through that yourselves quickly, pause and do so, otherwise we're going to get rolling. Alright, a native species and a non-native species are competing for the same resource within the same ecosystem. The non-native species is more likely to survive than the native species in which of the following situations? Alright, step 1, be awesome, highlight. Bam. Alright, let's go over what native species and non-native species are. Native species means they pretty much belong there, they started there, they grew up there. That's their hometown. That's pretty much their home court, right? Non-native species mean they're not naturally from there. They're not naturally from that environment. They're invading, right? Sometimes they call them an invasive species, right? Because they're invading somewhere they don't necessarily belong, okay? So, what do we know? We know they're competing for the same resource, and one is from there. They are normally there getting that resource, and one is not normally from there, right? So, with that being said, let's go through some of these questions, or excuse me, some of these answers, and let's see if we can pick some off. Okay, so let's look at F. F says both the native species and the non-native species thrive on the same food source. Okay, well, that may be the case, but remember our original question. The original question is posed, the non-native species is more likely to survive than the native species in which situation? Well, that doesn't tell us anything. That just tells us, F just says, yo, they're just both competing for the same resource. So let's say they both like fruits and nuts, right? That doesn't tell us why the non-native one would have an advantage over the native one. So F is eliminated. Okay, so let's knock that one out, right? Alright, so let's look at G. G says the native species is immune to certain pathogens in the ecosystem. Well, again, let's go back to our question and let's make sure that falls in line with the question. The question says the non-native species is more likely to survive than the native species in which situation. So the non-native species lives, native species has less of a chance to live. Well, that's the opposite of what G says, right? Because G says the native species is immune to pathogens. What are pathogens? Well, we know that pathogens are disease-causing things, right? Things that cause disease or things that cause you harm, right? So they're saying in G that native species are not affected by these harm-causing things, whereas the invading non-native species are affected, and that's backwards. That is not what the question says, and therefore G, you're gone. Okay, let's look at H. Predators prey on both native and non-native species. Well, H is very similar to F. It's a both thing. F says both native and non-native species thrive on the same food. H says predators prey on both of them. So again, F and H don't give an advantage to either one. And if we look back at our question, the question is, which situation would the non-native species have an advantage? And since no advantage is given in H or F, they're both wrong. They can't be considered as answer choices because, at the very least, G gives one an advantage. It's the wrong one, but hey, at least it gives one an advantage, right? H, it doesn't give one an advantage. So let's knock out H. So really we're left with one, but let's break this down a little bit more. Let's look at J. The non-native species has no natural enemies in an ecosystem. Well, let's think about this, right? So let's say we have squirrels that naturally live in this area, and these squirrels feed on, let's say, little snakes, whatever. And we have birds that eat these squirrels, right? So let's say it's on a certain island. Let's say people come over with dogs that are not usually native to this island. They drop these dogs off. Well, these dogs, let's assume that all they have to eat are these snakes, right? And birds don't typically feed on dogs. So when this dog's introduced to this island, it has no enemies. It has nothing to stop it or regulate it. So it's just like, it's coming in wrecking shop, right? No enemies. It's competing for that resource, whereas the squirrel is competing for the resource, and it has enemies. It's getting attacked, or the fox, or anything we want to use. So the dog comes in, it wrecks shop. It has no enemies, right? The same thing, they do this a lot, or this happened a lot in Australia. There's a lot of invasive species that keep getting brought over, like foxes, cats, rabbits, something called a cane toad, and camels. And they're coming to Australia. They're getting brought over. They're not native to Australia, so in other words, they don't really belong there. Therefore, they don't have a lot of predators, and they are out competing the things that normally live there. So they're coming in and wrecking shop because they have nothing to really stop them. So they have to do some things to, they're trying to get some techniques to balance that out, because when non-native species come in, they have no predators, they have nothing to stop them. So Australia is actually turning to the devil to try to help them out. The Tasmanian devil, right? And they're trying to reintroduce that because Tasmanian devil, somewhere along the line, either got wiped out from that area or, excuse me, the population just went way, way down. So they're trying to reintroduce this thing to drive out these non-native species. But the overall point is, when something comes in that doesn't necessarily belong, it doesn't have any competitors, and it blows everything up. Let's give one more example, even though we know that the answer is J. Let's say we have a country, and this country has only nice restaurants to eat at. That's all they have, right? Let's say I go over to this country, okay, you guys only have nice restaurants. I'm going to bring something you guys aren't used to. I'm going to bring McDonald's over, right? And because there's no other fast foods, I have no competition. So I'm bringing something over to compete with people, and maybe people like cheaper foods. Well, they're going to go to the McDonald's, and it's going to shut down everything else because there's nothing to compete. I have no competition. I'm blowing everybody out of the water. And there's nothing to really balance me out. So remember, native species, normally there. Non-native, not normally there. And usually when they get introduced, there's no predators to stop them, right? So the answer again is J. The non-native species have no natural enemies in the ecosystem. Therefore, they can outcompete everybody. All right, guys. Mission accomplished. Have an awesome day.